All right, welcome everybody to the Friday Tech Talk. And today's special guest is Ben Parasot. Am I saying that right? My apologies.
No, it's okay. Paraso. The T is silent.
Paraso. All right, we have Ben Paraso. He works for Planet Argon, and he's a senior web developer. He's an engineer manager and a developer advocate. Today's talk is called Work-Life Balance in Tech, which is very important for all of us. And Ben will delve into time mastery and balanced growth and a mental calm. And I'm thinking that might be some good meditation. So without further ado, Ben, welcome and take it away.
Thank you. Let me share my screen here for a second. All right. We all seeing it?
We can see it.
Excellent. So welcome. Yeah. Topic today is work-life balance in tech, strategies for staying successful while maintaining your chill. I am Ben Paraso. I'm the software engineering manager at Planet Argon. And let's dive in. So I thought that before we get into some of the tips and stuff, we could talk a little bit about the history of work-life balance. As I was researching this presentation, came across some interesting facts. So Henry Ford actually was the first person to introduce the standard 40-hour work week to his employees in his factories in 1926. In America, at least before the 20s, it was pretty common to work 100 hours a week. Like, there was usually no, well, that's not true, but like many more hours a week. There was no weekends per se. Saturdays were generally accepted as a work day, and Sundays, if they were off, were generally off for like religious reasons. So there wasn't really any like, oh, you work this many days on and then you have a break. It was just kind of work unless you have a reason not to work. In 1938, Congress passed the Fair Labor Standards Act, which normalized or legalized, I guess, the 40-hour work week and required employers to provide overtime compensation after that. It's funny, actually in 38 was the 44-hour work week, and they changed it to 40 in 1940. 1970s, the term work-life balance actually first started to come into use. It was in the UK, and by the 1980s, the women's liberation movement had really popularized it as a means of expressing what a portion of what they were their advocacy was for. And then finally in the 90s, the business community embraced it almost as like a benefit, similar to like salary or health benefits. So that's kind of a recap of where we came from. Some other interesting things I saw, there's been like historical patterns of global crises leading to overwork in populations. So if you think about it, this makes sense. Global crisis is often followed by a significant drop in employment across a variety of sectors and different population groups. So those fewer jobs lead to less secure working conditions for the people that have their jobs still, or the people that are searching for jobs. And so this can cause employees to feel that there's this heightened sense of urgency to prove themselves. If your job feels always at risk, you might be willing to sacrifice some work-life balance in order to keep it. And employers tend to take advantage of those, whether they are meaning to or not, by just allowing their employees to work more than they maybe should or need to. Currently, work-life balance, there's a pretty strong fight, I guess, conversation, dialogue happening. As we all know, tech layoffs were a huge thing in 2023. Almost 250,000 people were laid off in 2023 in the tech sector alone. So job insecurity is pretty high. Because of this, some companies are using that insecurity to push for stricter return to office policies. or even reducing workforces, especially middle management, and having larger teams managed by fewer peoples. Amazon just rolled this out with their return to office policy, which included fewer managers managing more people. So it's an interesting document. If you haven't looked at it, you should go look. On the flip side of this, and in a more positive note, a lot of companies have seen the opportunity to kind of come in and hopefully poach or pick up some of the talent that are being laid off or leaving these larger tech companies that have stricter RTO policies. They're doing this by offering, official fully remote work schedules, 4-day work weeks, and then just a range of work-life balance initiatives that some of these other companies aren't offering. So this is kind of a given, but I wanted to put this slide in here anyways, because I found some stats that I thought were pretty intriguing. Work-life balance matters. We all know that. We've all probably had jobs where we didn't feel like we had a good work-life balance, and those suck. So, but beyond just like the feeling of, oh, I work all the time and I never get to see friends or family, or my job stresses me out and I take that home. There are actually like studies and reports that have shown the physical, mental, and relational impacts of poor work-life balance. 60% of employees in a variety, over a variety of different studies have reported that they have increased mental health issues when they feel like they have poor work-life balance. And this is specifically depression and anxiety. So 1.6 times higher risk of depression and 1.74 times higher risk for anxiety. So that's not great. There's also a much higher risk of coronary heart disease and stroke when you have a very stressful job and you don't have a lot of good work-life balance. A big bulk of employees often have reported that their job and their lack of work-life balance negatively affects their personal relationships. And that's primarily with family. So that's spouses, children, and just immediate family members. All right, so that's a bummer, but what can we do about it? The first thing that you can do is find the right company. Unfortunately, you have to find a little bit of the company has to be responsible for work-life balance as well. It's not something that can be entirely employee-driven. So finding the right company is key. Then once you're there, or if you're at an existing company, there are ways that you can encourage existing good work-life balance and reinforcing the policies and processes that are already in state. And then you can also improve poor work-life balance by doing a little bit of an inward dive, and we'll talk about that in a second. All right, so what are some ways to find the right company? Well, like I said, an employee can't create a good work-life balance on their own. The company has to have policies and processes in place that support work-life balance, and these can be things that aren't even explicitly work-life balance related. They just have those sort of effects. So when you're searching for a job, either when you're looking for companies or applying to them, or if you're in the interview process, it's really important to look for both the signs of poor work-life balance as well as signs of good work-life balance. Some poor work-life balance red flags you might look for are suspiciously high salary for the role. This is often something that people will intentionally or maybe unintentionally overlook just because it's so attractive. It's hard to turn down a really high salary job. And a lot of people, especially as we'll see in a second, younger people are more likely to sacrifice work-life balance for a high salary. But if work-life balance is a really big concern of yours, if you are looking at different types of the same job, and one of them is with a big company, it's got a huge salary, chances are they are going to maybe require more of you and expect less work-life balance from you. So keep that in mind. Unlimited PTO is another big red flag. That's another contentious issue in the tech sector, but as we'll see in a second, like unlimited PTO does not mean unlimited. Often it means less than what you might get with just a standard PTO policy. Other ones are vague PTO policies. So this is not necessarily the amount of PTO that you're given for a position, but how and when you're expected to take it. So if there's no real like standards of like how you request PTO, how it gets approved, those vagaries are ways that employers can work to keep you from using your PTO because you didn't follow the procedure that they're making up on the spot. High turnover rate obviously is a big one. Lack of personal or wellness programs. These can be parental leave, mental health leave, even flexibility off during the day to take doctor's appointments, those sort of things. An obvious grind culture is another big one. I'm a millennial, so when I came up in the industry, it was like sort of the peak of grind culture, and that if you're researching a company and you see a lot of people on LinkedIn, a lot of the employees, and that's their whole thing that they're super proud about is like, sleep is, I'll sleep when I'm dead. I live and breathe my job, and I live at the office and that sort of thing. That's, a choice, and that's a lifestyle. If that's not what you want, you should probably avoid that company because they're probably going to want you to participate in that sort of grind culture. And then the other one is just like the idea that, work-life balance is a vibe. Like it just feels like we have a good work-life balance here. Like, no, work-life balance is like documented policies and actual things that you can point to and measure. So if people in an interview say that it's, can't give you specifics or they just talk in generalities, but everything's super positive, but they can't tell you why, that's maybe a red flag as well. So what are some good work-life balance things that you can look for? Clear hours expectations. This is both like throughout the week as well as throughout the day. So if you're on a distributed team, especially, like when are you expected to sign on to Slack? When can you leave? Like what's the expectations around making yourself available and not? So just clear expectations. They should be able to explain that to you. Remote and hybrid work options are obviously one. We'll see later that remote work is not necessarily the best for work-life balance, but the having that opportunity usually means that companies respect the person's choice. If you get into an interview and your interviewers don't seem prepared for your interview, that can be a big red flag. So make sure it's a good sign when interviewers come well prepared, because that means that they had time to prepare for your interview, which probably means that their work life is such that they can make the time and they feel more balanced. And then, like I said before about the vibes, if your interviewers talk about work-life balance specifics, that's probably the biggest sign of all. So, and these are things that you can ask for, like, hey, what's your parental leave policy? Like, how often did you, interviewer, how much time did you take off last year? Or how often in the past month have you had to work more than 40 or 45 hours a week or something like that? So if they are giving you those answers and they're good answers, that's probably a good sign. All right, so let's say that you've already got the job or you just got the job. Great. How do you enforce or improve work-life balance for existing processes? Well, I've got 3 steps. I did a lot of research. Work-life balance is not some amorphous concept. There's all these specific things that you can do to help shape the culture in your company. And as I was researching those, I came across a lot of these specific things. They all seem to sort of fall under one of these 3 buckets. And that's setting boundaries, taking breaks, and insisting on realism. So what does setting personal work boundaries look like? Well, the main important one is don't be available 24/7. That's very, that sounds obvious, but you'd be surprised at how even the most sort of mild, not grind culture type of person will, especially when they first get hired, try to make themselves available all the time because they want to impress their boss and they want to impress their teammates. But that's not always impressive. And it's often setting an example or a precedent for yourself that you will then have to live up to when you're, a year or two from now when you're like, I don't want to be available all the time. So what are some things that you can do? You can disable Slack or team notifications for after hours. Those tools have those capabilities. You can turn it off so it doesn't ping you until 8 a.m. or after 6 or whatever. And then don't check your emails. Like, just don't answer emails, like, it's pretty straightforward. You have to have a little self-control, obviously. And, maybe for the first couple of weeks, you will look at your email and just make sure you're not missing something, or make sure that you, don't sleep through a meeting that gets scheduled. But, don't train people to expect that from you. So that leads into the second point, which is train your employer and your colleagues on how and when you will respond to communications. Some good ways you can do this is to keep a consistent work schedule. Nothing trains a colleague better than just seeing you show up every day at a certain time and leave at a certain time and not respond outside of those times. Block out work and non-work times on your calendar. You'll see calendar referenced here quite a lot throughout the rest of this presentation. I'm a big fan of calendaring as a way to enforce work-life balance, because it's very visual and it's very apparent for people. So they go and they see, oh, Ben is not available right now. He's blocked it off on his calendar. That's a very clear signal that you're not going to respond. And it kind of helps reinforce the consistent work schedule that you've set. And then also just keep in mind that your tools are not often the problem, but it's how you are expected to use them. When I was doing research for this, I came across this interesting interview from the former CEO. I don't know if he's still the former, or anyways, the CEO of Basecamp. And he was giving a talk about work-life balance, and specifically about tools and the interruptions that they can cause in your personal life, such as Slack, such as like anything that pings you in the middle of the night. And he made a really good point that if your boss calls your phone at like 11 p.m. and you pick up, you don't hang up from that conversation and think, oh, my phone is such a problem. Like, I wish I didn't have this phone. You think, my boss is stepping over the line and it doesn't respect my boundaries. So think about that when you're thinking about these other tools. It's like, they are just tools, and you can control them in a way that, trains people to respect your boundaries. Your boss calling your cell phone at 11 p.m. is a different story, though. And finally, another good way that you can set your personal work boundaries is just to remove visual work cues. So, don't install mobile versions of desktop productivity tools on your phone if you can help it. Turn off your computer and put it out of sight, especially if you have like a smaller living environment. If you work at your dinner table, maybe move it into a bedroom or a spare room or something. You don't want to have it around because that's just too tempting for a lot of people. And if you work in the office, leave your computer at home if you can. Leave the office, get out of there. All right, I said I would talk about this earlier, and I will now. Working from home employees often struggle more with setting boundaries, surprisingly. Maybe not surprisingly if you think about it, but 51% of employees experience burnout symptoms while working from home. And 40% of remote workers say unplugging is the biggest challenge that they face, hence moving it away, getting it out of your sight. 67% feel pressured to be available at all hours of the day. And 29% say that they struggle to have work-life balance at all. And this is slightly higher than the 23% of in-office employees. And then finally, remote employees work 1.4 more days every month and about 3 hours every week addition on their computer compared to their in-office counterparts. So just some numbers to back up the previous steps. Like, if if you don't take those steps to personally protect your boundaries and your time, you will likely end up as one of these, these people that are reporting these. It's not necessarily even a choice. It's just a pattern that you can fall into. All right, let's talk about breaks. Let's talk about the graph first, actually. So there was a survey. I can't remember. I have all the sources at the end of it, so you can look them up when we share the deck. But the majority of people that were surveyed in this study took less than a 30-minute lunch break on average. A good portion took a 30 to 60-minute lunch break, which is great, but a whopping 17% took less than a 15-minute lunch break. That's like almost a fifth of the workforce working through their lunch every day. And that's just wild to me. Maybe it's just because I love eating, but God, I couldn't imagine. So take breaks, take your lunch, take your PTO. That's a huge one too, especially remote workers. 20% of remote workers reported not taking or taking less than 1 week of PTO in 2019, which just astounds me. I think that I'm just going to sort of theorize here, but it makes sense to me, at least, or it could, that having a remote work environment like makes you feel like you're not really at work anyways, which is not true. I work remotely, but like I could feel that people are like, oh, I shouldn't. Taking PTO doesn't feel quite as much as like, oh, I'm stepping away from the office as it does when you're actually going to an office. So these initially surprised me, but then when I sort of dug into them, it's like, I guess it kind of makes sense. 52% of these remote workers studied reported not planning any time off in the next year, which is wild. And then again, unlimited PTO, so we'd come back to this, but 42% of workers with unlimited PTO in this study took less than 2 weeks off per year. So that's, you can take a lot of time off with unlimited PTO, but that's often not why unlimited PTO is there. So keep that in mind. And then, of course, taking regular breaks throughout your day is a huge thing. I do it regularly. I've really had to train myself using a Pomodoro timer, but it's just kept my productivity very high and also my stress level lower. So again, keeping a consistent work schedule helps with this. That includes your breaks, blocking out your calendar with your lunch, or if you're going to take like an afternoon walk, that's huge. And then again, using a Pomodoro timer can help you break up your work chunks and sort of, that's more about de-stressing, but that's a big part of work-life balance too. All right. Third part of enforcing good work-life balance in your existing job is to insist on realism. So what do I mean by that? Well, your company might have policies in place that are just not realistic. One of the big ones is ticket estimation, and this I think does go to the devs. I've certainly been guilty of this myself, but if you are giving an issue estimation or a ticket estimation and you are giving an answer that you think your PM, the product owner, or the stakeholder wants to hear because when they want it done, then that's not really an accurate estimation. You're going to probably work later into the night or on the weekends to finish it. You're going to be stressed out about it, and you're probably not going to do as good of a job. So, if you can, ask to use story points instead of hours for estimations. That really helps decouple the work from the time that you have, and gives you more of a view of like the effort that's going to be put into this work. And that can kind of help you think about it less of like a ticking time bomb and more of just like a project or, a mountain that you have to scale. How much effort is this going to take? And then also just err on the side of higher estimation. I mean, especially for new devs that come to our team, I add a point or two in the story estimations to every estimate that they give. It's a lot better to come in underestimation than to overpromise and underdeliver. Obviously, the longer you go, and especially if you are on like a true agile team that's running sprints and tracking velocity, you will, you'll average out and you'll start to be pretty consistent. But when you start a project or when you start on a new job, like bump up your estimate higher. It's not going to hurt anyone. All right, and then also ask for explicit on-call processes. This is a big one that I have seen and heard talk in tech is like, yeah, work-life balance is great, but we have these live apps in production, and if one of them goes down, like work-life balance goes out the window. That can be the case, but it doesn't have to be. You should be able to know exactly when you're expected to be available and what your responsibilities are during those times. So if your company doesn't have an existing on-call process, there are ways that you can sort of move them to create one. One of the is asking for a schedule. So that's a pretty small request. Be like, hey, I know that we're all supposed to be sort of on call, or that we have, people, we're all supposed to be responsible for responding to an incident if something goes down. I wonder if you could put together a schedule for who is supposed to be most on call or something like that. Doesn't have to be super specific ask. Just be like, hey, can you put together like what your views are on, how often I should have my phone like not on silent or something. Then once they do that, if that you can get that buy-in, then the next one you can level up to is, hey, can you write down what the actual expectations are for my role in this incident? So great, I know when I'm supposed to be available. Now, what am I expected to do? Like, there's a lot of different roles in an incident response, and being able to identify what role you play is really helpful in not only keeping yourself sane during those times, but also resolving the incident quickly. And then finally, once they've done that, if you can get buy into that, then you swing big and you ask for a well-documented incident response playbook. All of the pieces are there at that point. They have the schedule, they have the roles mapped out, they have responsibilities. They just sort of have to put those together and make it more formalized. And boom, you've created an incident response playbook, or you've encouraged someone else to do that. And then finally, another realistic thing that you can ask for is on hours professional development. So a lot of companies have professional development funds, or they hype up that they really, encourage professional development amongst their team. However, they might not carve that out of your work schedule. And that's not really professional development if it's personal development. It might be personal development for your technical skills, but it's still happening off the clock and on your time. So for instance, if you were to book a trip to a conference for work, you probably would not be expected to take PTO to go to that work conference that your company's paying for. So if you view it like that, and you present it like that, that can often help you get, maybe an hour or two a month dedicated to exploring a new tech stack or tool, or even just reading a book. All right, but what if, Ben, you have a really crappy work-life balance already? That's all well and good, but I'm just so stressed out, don't have anything, like none of that exists. What do I do? Well, Harvard Business Review really came in and helped out with this one. They did, I think it was in 2022. I'd have to check. It's in the resources. They did a study of 200 self-identified overworked professionals in London. And from that study, they developed sort of a stepped process for helping not only make change within an organization, but also make change within yourself. Those 4 steps are pause and assess, denormalize overwork, reprioritize, and implement change. All right, so what is pausing and assessing? This is like pretty much the biggest time for, or like the biggest step that you should take. It's the most important, at least, because what this means is you are making yourself aware of your stress levels and your stress triggers, and you're taking the time and giving yourself the the capacity to step back and recognize those. So how do you do this? Well, you can block out time on your calendar. This could be an afternoon, or a couple hours, whatever. If you have the PTO, and you've got the time, you could take a day. Just be like, hey, I'm going to take a day off, and do this, because a lot of this is going to be personal work. So it's work related, but you might want to take an actual personal day so that you can work through some of this without feeling like the need to be on call or available to your work. And then, okay, so you've carved out some time, then you'll definitely want to ask yourself uncomfortable questions. These aren't fun, but they're necessary. So you can start with, what is currently causing me stress, or what is making me feel demotivated or disorganized? You can step back and say, what am I prioritizing? What am I sacrificing? And what is getting lost? So these are things that you can look at through the lens of your work. There are also things that you want to look at through the lens of your just life as a whole. So if you are looking at, what am I prioritizing? Don't keep that narrowly focused on the issues that you have in the backlog or the meetings that are on your calendar. Think about like, okay, well, I prioritize movie night with my spouse, or I prioritize dinner with my family, or I prioritize, karaoke with my friends. Like, those are all things that if you do them regularly, you are prioritizing them. They should go onto your list and into your exercise here. And then what is getting lost? This is a little more nebulous and can be a little harder, both emotionally and just mentally, because you're trying to imagine things that you maybe should be doing, or you feel like you should be doing that you're not. So it's easy to get sucked into sort of a guilt hole with this one. So don't necessarily let yourself go that deep. You should be asking yourself these questions and answering them as free from self-judgment as you possibly can. But it is a good idea to dive a little bit deeper into this one and say, like, is there anything that I'm leaving out from my life that I maybe know that I shouldn't be, or that I expected to have in my life at this point? You can quantify all of this a little bit. That helps out people like me, if you're like me, having numbers and figures behind, having data behind your assumptions and your feelings is very helpful. So track your time. If you don't track your time at your work anyways, you could start using a timer like Harvest or something. There's free accounts that you can sign up for. And this is a really good way to sort of step back from your work and get a very long 30,000-foot view of the actual work that you're doing. And then you can take that data and check it against your job description. And you can say, like, oh, does this work that I'm doing actually match with what I was told my job was going to be? And if not, like, where are the discrepancies? What's being lost because of that? And what am I having to add on to, or what's adding on to my time commitments because I'm doing other things that aren't necessarily part of my assigned job? You can also, from there, ask yourself about the nature of the work that you're doing and saying, does this benefit my company, my team, or myself? Finally, you should probably turn this into a regular practice. Annually is good. It doesn't have to be every month or so, but maybe it's a New Year's ritual. It's January. It's time to reflect, step back and say, like, hey, what did last year look like? What do I want this year to look like? This is a good place to start. All right, denormalizing overwork is another big one, and this is actually even more emotion-based. So if you're gonna get into the feels, this is the place to do it. In fact, the Harvard Business Review article, like, there was this whole section was just all about recognizing and normalizing your emotions and your emotional response to your overwork. So some of the questions that they have you ask are, how does this work make me feel? Do I feel energized and fulfilled? Or do I usually feel angry and resentful or even sad? That can be really big cues as to whether you have a good work-life balance or not. a lot of times we think of work-life balance as like time-based. And that might be true because time is a finite resource. And if you have too much time spent on one thing, you might not have it on another that you want to spend time on. But it's also important to think about how that time makes you feel. So yeah, maybe you're working a 9-hour day, but the work that you're doing is really exciting you and energizing you, and you go home to your friends or your family or your roommates or your dog and you're stoked and you're talking with them and you're happy. Likewise, you could have a 6-hour day and that just like sucks the life out of you and it pisses you off and you hate it, and you go home and you mope in your room, you go to bed early, and you don't have good relationships with your family. So it's not necessarily time-based. It's also like energy level and emotional. So make sure that you check in with yourself during this time of reflection and actually articulate how the work-life balance that you're trying to fix, how is it actually making you feel? And then finally, you should give yourself permission, again, not judging, but just recognizing, acknowledging the trade-offs that you've made in pursuit of your career. We've all probably done it. You trade, everything is a trade-off. I'm trading off, I don't know, something else I could be doing right now to give this presentation, but I'm happy to do it because I love it and I love this topic. So it's good to think about your work day, think about your work like week and life in general, and say, all right, in pursuit of this, like the things that maybe I'm doing also after work hours or, like during work, like, am I trading off like picking up my kid from school because I'm choosing to have this meeting be scheduled at that time, and I'm, or like that's a weird example, but it's one. So again, without placing judgment on yourself, start to like create a list in your mind of those things that you are trading off, and then you'll start to see like whether or not you think they're worth it. All right, we're going to keep getting into the hard questions with reprioritizing how you spend your time. You really want to think about, this is like when you really step back and think about like what are your priorities, and not just like day-to-day priorities to get things done. It's not a to-do list that you're coming up with here. It's a values list, and your values are the things that you care about the most and the things that you want to dedicate your time to. If you could wave a magic wand and just have all the free time in the world, this is what I would choose to spend it on. So step back and ask yourself, what really matters to me? What am I willing to sacrifice to get that, and for how long? These questions are hard again, but they're necessary. What regrets do I already have, and what regrets will I continue to have, or will I have if I continue working in this way? Those can be tough questions, but again, they highlight areas that you might want to change in the next section. Another important thing here, and this is just more of sort of like a sidebar, but you should understand the relative importance of work. Work is important. We all do it. This is the society we live in. We live in a society, and you have to work. Unless you're super rich or something, but I would probably want to still work a little, doing something. Anyways, but your work should not probably be all encompassing. And I mean, this is again just my opinion, but probably not driving your life values. So your values could be inclusive of the work that you do, but you will definitely want to ask yourself, should they be derived from the work that you're doing? So just keep that in mind as you're doing all these internal reflections. All right, finally getting to change. You'll want to decide on to implement some change once you've done all that self-reflection and timesheet analysis and all of that good stuff in your one day off. Changes are generally public or private, obviously. Public changes are something that explicitly shifts your colleagues' expectations of you, and private changes are something that you are doing differently, might be noticed by your colleagues, but you're not necessarily requiring them to change anything or their view of you. So this could be things like spending more time with your family, leaving the office or logging off Slack every day at a certain time, getting a full hour of lunch every day, taking an afternoon walk every day. Lots of different examples, and these should all be work that you've done in the previous slides. Some other things that you can do to implement change is, again, calendar wisely. Talk with your manager about scheduling focus time, accountability time, and personal time on your calendar. So focus time is when you're doing your work, you're actually producing things. Accountability time is when you're talking about your work. So this might be one-on-ones, all hands meetings, meetings with a client, that sort of thing. And then, yeah, put personal time on there, especially if it's during the day. Block out your calendar for a doctor's appointment, or, you know, the dog needs to go get groomed or something. This helps your people in your work environment know when you're available and when you're not. It goes back to training your colleagues about how you want to be treated. Another thing that you can do to help implement change is to inform people of the trade-offs that are implicit in their new requests. So if your goal in your change is to not take on as much work and therefore have more time to dedicate to the things that you value in your life, there's going to need to be some trade-offs. So you can frame these in a way that is not aggressive or defensive. A good tactic for this is, hey, I'm currently focused on XYZ, and I understand that you want me to prioritize ABC. Would you like me to pause work on XYZ in order to complete this ABC task? And then just leave it there. That makes it very clear that you're willing to do the work and that you are maybe even excited to do the work, but you do have to take something else off your plate in order to put this on there. You can't just make a bigger plate. And then finally, and this is I wish I'd put this in the resource notes. I might add it later, but changing the way you agree to and discuss deadlines. This is a point that I pulled from a talk that I heard at Lead Dev New York in September from this really brilliant speaker. And she discussed deadlines as not necessarily a promise, but a hypothesis. So a really good way to change your language around deadlines that can help improve your work-life balance is to give a hypothesis about the request that's coming in. So if someone gives you a ticket and they expect you to complete it, instead of like agreeing to a deadline, you could say, my assessment of this issue is this. My hypothesis is that it's going to take me this long, and I'm about, let's say 70% sure that my hypothesis is correct. So it lets you sort of set your own deadline, and it also tells the person how sure you are of that deadline. So it's not a promise at all because you've given yourself some wiggle room. Now, I know you're probably all saying, but Ben, I don't make my own deadlines. I'm given a ticket. I'm told when to complete it by. That's that. Fine. That's okay. You can still use this approach a little bit, and you can tweak it to make it be more like, I'm hypothesizing that I will only complete this amount of work to this deadline, or I'm going to have to work this many extra hours, or I'm only about 40% confident that I can complete that by that time. So you can keep the deadline, but you can inform the person asking for that deadline either how much extra work it's going to take to complete it, or how little confidence you have in your ability to complete that by that time. By doing this, they might be hard asses and they might be like, well, screw it, like just do it, and I don't want to hear about your hypothesis. That's probably not going to be the case, but it could be. Most of the time, I feel like people are either going to be, okay, well, let's try and get as much as you can done, and we'll reassess at that point. Or, oh, that's a good point. I didn't realize you were so swamped, or I didn't realize this was so difficult. Let's push the deadline out a bit. So it can give you those a little in pushing out and reclaiming some of your balance time there. So those are the 4 steps in the Harvard Business Review. Before we end, I wanted to talk a little bit about some other just interesting random facts that I found. while researching this conversation. So the feeling of work-life balance definitely gets better as you get older. I don't know if this feels good for people that are not of boomer or late Gen X but generations, but it's definitely something that, like, as you get older, you're going to feel like you have more work-life balance. Again, this could be because you just get used to the work-life balance that you have, or you have fewer things in your personal life that you care about and you want to attend to. Who knows? But there are studies. There's these sister studies actually conducted in Poland in 2003 and 2013 that they studied the same middle-class participants, and those participants reported huge swings in positive work-life balance scores in the 2013 study than they did 10 years earlier in the 2003. So they like controlled for change and like major changes that would skew that data. And they're like, these are pretty much the same people in the same positions, and they might have advanced in their career a little bit, but it's not such huge wild swings. Like none of them won the lottery or anything. And just those 10 years time really did a huge increase in work-life balance. Also, professional service, actually going back to getting older, Gen Z, lots of studies about Gen Z versus boomers, but in this one that I found, Gen Z specifically reported greater dissatisfaction with their work-life balance than older generations, specifically Gen X and boomers. Gen Z was much less likely to work from home and much less likely to take a pay cut in exchange for more flexible work hours. This might be because they don't have the opportunity, or because salary is a bigger important part for them than their time, but who knows? Those are just interesting facts. And boomers are way more content with their work-life balance than any other group. Couple more things real quickly. Professional services, much more likely to work 50 hours a week or more. Those are lawyers, developers, HR admin people, managers, accountants, etc. Consulting firms, absolute lowest. So if you want to have a really good work-life balance, don't become a consultant. Finally, according to the World Economic Forum study that was done, Italy and Denmark are the best countries for self-reported work-life balance. Mexico, Colombia, Costa Rica, Turkey, and Japan rank the worst. And finally, not all free time is equally restorative. This was a really interesting point that I found. Watching TV across every generation, Gen X, Boomers, Millennials, and Gen Z, the highest, the most commonly and best reported form of relaxation and unwinding. However, after that, it goes wildly different, and millennials and Gen Z go to social media, and boomers and Gen X go to reading, taking a walk, or spending time with family. And guess what? Gen Z and millennials have much higher work-related stress and just life stress in general, self-reported, obviously. And then the Gen X and boomer groups, much lower stress reports and much better work-life balance. So keep in mind, you might have all the free time in the world. How you spend that is going to affect like how you feel about yourself. So I guess that's my shameless anti-plug of social media. But okay. That's all I had today. Any questions?
Yeah, no, that's a great presentation, Ben, and really good advice and tips for work-life balance. It's something we all need to work on. And I think kind of the key point is stay away from social media.
Yeah, that was the whole thing. Yeah, one takeaway.
Yeah, that's it seems impossible these days, but I do totally understand that. Just want to let everyone know you're welcome to ask questions in the chat for Ben. If you do want to ask a verbal question, you can do that. Just go ahead and raise your hand. It's just on the bottom. And yeah, that was really good. With work-life balance, like I totally get the advice and the points, and I myself need to try to work towards that. And I will rewatch this actually. It was really good. So I find, and you said you were a project manager for a time. I find when you're in project management and in management, I guess in general, that it's harder to implement the work-life balance with the advice you gave. Any tips for if you're in management?
Yeah, I mean, I think managers often have the best, our best position to have to influence work-life balance in their culture of their teams. It's work-life balance and like the expectation of being available. This is another thing that I kept coming back to. And I really wanted to put it in the deck, but I just didn't know where. But companies often equate availability with accountability, and they're not the same. So like the increase in availability does not mean that we are being more productive or that our work matters more or is better. You know, before, you know, Slack, before smartphones, like we all had it was harder to keep in touch, but things still got done. So this is just to say that I think that, and comes back to like the idea that company owners, employers hire managers, like not just middle managers, but like maybe directors or C-level. They have to really set a tone, or at least allow for a tone to be set at their company of a better work-life balance. And then it's the manager's job to implement that through example. And when you're a manager, you have people responsible for you, or if you're a project manager, you might have, you know, clients or other projects that you're responsible for. So there's obviously a very understandable drive to feel like, oh, my job is to make sure that other people are doing well, that an app is, you know, not crashing or a project's running smoothly. So there's an understandable drive to like feel like you need to be available at all times, because what happens if any of those things goes wrong? But it's also, again, just an important thing to step back and sort of run out the scenario. Like, let's say I'm a people manager. What happens if my teammate is, you know, like having a problem and it's 8 p.m. and they want to Slack me because they're struggling with something? Probably shouldn't even be working on it at that time anyways, but let's say they're struggling with something. If I answer it, then I'm like telling them, hey, it's okay to reach out to me after hours. I'm available anytime you need. And then I've set that precedent. Otherwise, come in the next morning. You can prioritize messages that you got the night before and be like, oh, I saw that you were struggling with this and you messaged me. I don't respond to stuff at that time, generally, unless it's emergency. Do you want to pair right now? Do you want to talk about it right now? So it's important to like empathize and acknowledge that that person reached out and that they are, you know, you weren't just shrugging them off, but also, you know, keeping those boundaries clear and using that as a time to reinforce them actually and be like, hey, don't reach out to me at any point. Sorry, but I'm not going to respond to you. And if you need me to, then you probably shouldn't be working on it then. You should just wait until the next day because we'll talk about it now. You kind of have to be not a jerk, but like project manager is much different, I think, especially if you're working in an agency environment, because, you know, there's a client management side to it. You want to keep people happy. And even in like a larger company, stakeholders within a company, different departments, you want to keep happy. But again, like, I think it all comes back to training your colleagues and your stakeholders, like what they can expect from you. And hopefully you are in a place where you're allowed to do that and allowed to be like, no, I'm not going to respond after 6 or 7 p.m.
Yeah, no, that's good advice. And I try not to be available, but it's hard just because I want to be there for my team and make sure that, you know, that the tasks and the projects are getting done correctly. So something I need to work on. but it's yeah, it's just hard sometimes just because you want to break away, but you also want to make sure your team succeeds.
Right.
So
And I
yeah.
mean, and it's perfectly fine to like set, it's, about expectation setting as well. So it's perfectly fine, I think, to have like, hey, we're having like a really huge sprint and we're going to do like 2 weeks and we're pushing for this deadline. And this is like, we are going to release this at this time and like, we're going to do it, And so for the next 2 weeks, it's going to be hell or whatever, So like, I think that's one way to manage that as well, is to like allow for stressful time where there are no boundaries, but time box that and be like, all right, this is going to be hell week or whatever. But by the end, we're going to have released our cool new feature. And then we're going to go back to being our normal time, like our normal work-life balance selves. And we don't have to answer. I think that, again, I mean, like, it really comes back to setting the example. If you are a manager and you are answering things to your team after hours, I think what that says is, I expect you to be working after hours, and I expect you to reach out to me when I have these questions, because I will be working after hours. And I think as as good intention as that is, it really just actually reinforces this behavior or this expectation that, yeah, you don't have to work after hours, but you probably should, and I will be, so feel free to reach out.
Okay. Yeah, and at the end of the 2-week sprint, we're gonna have a big party.
Exactly.
No, good stuff. Now, does anyone have any last questions? All right. Gab, do you have a question and anything else you'd like to add?
No, I don't have any questions. That was actually a very, very clear presentation by Ben. I really learned a lot, especially with I could use some tips about trying to get off of social media on my free time and try to like uh, like refresh with other things. I have a lot of hobbies that I can definitely try. Maybe even try new ones. For some things to add, we do have a couple more tech talks aligned for the next few weeks. So tech talks are always done on Friday, same time, 1 p.m. Pacific. And we're also encouraging all of the graduates of our bootcamp to join our new Discord server. So we're trying to transfer to a separate Discord server. You might have gotten the invitation already from our newsletter or any other emails from from the Tech Academy. And for our graduates and current students, we also have the accelerator program. So for students and graduates, you have access to 3 months for free. And then after that, it's just going to be like a small amount for every succeeding months. But with the accelerator, you have access to hundreds of videos and lessons. And then every Tuesday, we also have free, live classes wherein you can ask Eric some questions and even suggest future topics. All right, that's all for my announcements.
Thanks, Gab. Yeah, and with social media, everybody wants to be an influencer. It's stressful. All right, Ben, that was a great talk, great presentation. We thank you very much for coming out, and we would definitely love to have you back at some point. And have yourself a great weekend.
Right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming and listening.
All right, thanks, Ben. All right, thanks everyone else,
Thank you, Ben.
and everyone else, have yourself a great weekend. We will have the next week's Tech Talk, same time, same channel. Have a great weekend.